Hey, it is your buddy, Peace and Harmony, with you here today. Much love going out to all the beautiful, empowered harmonizers. We are zooming in and focusing in a little bit more in depth on a great viewer question, which is how to overcome, how to change basically your way of relating to others that is not based on a trauma bond. In other words, how do you break that cycle? And I think what they said, how do you stop missing the trauma bond? I think that's an awesome viewer question because it asks so much. So how do you stop missing the trauma bond, the relationship dynamics that are set in place and set into in motion by relationship with a malignant narcissist or a psychopath? For one thing, it's important to understand the definition and the experience of what a trauma bond is. A trauma bond is a type of attachment or relation or bond, whatever you want to call it, to someone who is abusive, to someone who is violating and enmeshing or overstepping of our boundaries, which basically makes us identityless or invisible or not having a presence or I am, that is based in security and that is just based in existence, being comfortable, based in the positive, based in strength and balance. So one thing to understand is what is abusive and what is emotionally abusive at the hands of a narcissist, a malignant narcissist, or a psychopath. Basically, what constitutes that? Most people, though, have a difficulty seeing that because of the trauma bond itself. Imagine a wound that does not want to see itself. Imagine a wound that does not want to know itself. Imagine a wound that cannot heal itself but is perpetually set in motion to keep itself in a wounded state. So that is very much like sort of the abyss or the what I call negative orderly direction thinking, nod thinking, versus pod thinking. So nod thinking meaning no, wrong, incorrect in the way of being attracted to the abuser. So realize that a trauma bond is based on a relationship with an emotional or physical abuser, someone who violates your vulnerabilities, your weakness, and sort of takes advantage of you. Where, you can't see how to protect or you have an inability to protect yourself based on the circumstances or dynamics of the relationship, particularly ones that are based off power and control. So where people are powerless, they want to take control. Where people are vulnerable, they want to get in and exploit. In other words, for their own ends. People who are in a trauma bond have the inability to sort of see the abuse that's occurring, or really what is set up is really the stage of denial. Basically placating and soothing, sort of numbing out and denying that this is happening. In other words, the fight or flight is on such target, is on such trigger. The fight or flight is so activated that adrenaline, the endorphin, the fight or flight, which is the amygdala, setting that, that fight or flight or freeze mode, that becomes set on hyperdrive. And it just sort of doesn't have a kickback mechanism to auto balance or auto correct itself. So when we talk about a trauma bond, very much people who have been abused, who have been physically or emotionally abused, hurt, or neglected, been pathologically lied to, betrayed, just sort of had their character, their I am under assassination. Basically, that is what exploitation and taking advantage of vulnerability. So when do those situations occur? When one is young, when one is a child, especially between the ages of 0 to 7. If your caretaker doesn't give you that boundary of respect, which then promulgates or develops into autonomy, it's because there is a violation at that developmental stage. Basically, that developmental stage for that person to mature was not met successfully. It's like a skill that did not get developed, an emotional skill, an awareness of consciousness. basically your I am, otherwise known as self-esteem. You need to really sort of understand the inner workings and how the interplays and how it feels in your life. It's like being blind and learning Braille for the first time. It's kind of like, really, one of the people who was very inspiring to me is Helen Keller. It's like being in the world and not knowing how to communicate it, but taking in little clues of success and validation that helps, open you up and give you the ability to understand, comprehend, digest, and, live and grow, and basically meet those developmental challenges and explore. And with the word that I'm looking for is basically expand and live in joy and fulfillment, and basically validating of that type of positive experience, what I call positive orderly direction thinking, feeling, behaving, and becoming. But the trauma bond is based really on someone who's taking advantage, so it can be set up in the early stages of life, or if you're vulnerable in new relationships, either in love, in marriage, or in business, or in communities where someone, or in family systems where they're taking advantage of others. In other words, there is a hidden agenda. In other words, everybody is not given open and honest, fair communication. There is a lack of empathy. In the narcissist relationship, there's an inability to connect with the feelings, needs, wishes, or presence of others. There is a lack of empathy. There is that. So there is this sort of feeling of rejection, and a rejection of affection, rejection of the positivity, which is not validated. It's a cycle that is not completed. We need to understand sort of what this is and what it means like to you in a palpable sense. Very much like Helen Keller. If you've studied her, she was born without the inability to see or hear. So she was blind and mute, but yet she overcame these disabilities, these hindrances, and became one of the greatest orators of our time. So this is a testimony to the miracle of the human spirit. So this is the area of growth and life. I think that life is the word that I'm looking for, to give you life, prosperity, and flow, versus pain and struggle and hindrance and sort of this existential hurt that is inflicted in these type of relationships with a malignant narcissist or a psychopath. So I kind of group these into the same, but the people who are on the supply and the target end, those people who have been recipients of this type of treatment, is where we're coming together here for. So it's those people who need, in their own experience right now, who need to give vision to what they have seen, who need to validate their vision, who need to validate their hearing, that they have heard what they have heard, and then to express it. It's like you're, coming to emotional awareness and consciousness. It's like awakening the Helen Keller within you, the one that had been, not seen and not heard. Do you understand? So it's the depth of pain really is at this existential level of healing. So you must understand the cause and really go back to the fine wiring that has created this effect of a trauma bond in your life. So it's having the privacy and the lack of pressure in, like, the privacy of these videos and your self-reflection time, hopefully, that you're able to complete during these videos, is to understand with safety and distance the ability to see, with objective eyes, what had occurred, and not be willing to deny the truth for the sake of protecting the abuser. Not be willing to deny the truth in order to protect the abuser, save the abuser, and then simultaneously elevate the abuser over you. There's a moment in time, I feel, that this link sort of came together. It's a coming together of a decision making within, a subconscious decision making within. You have to understand the richness of human psychology and emotions and consciousness and awareness and empathy that we are tapping into. And as we enter into the digital age, the age of automation, the age of artificial intelligence, you all, how far is this going to go with depleting people of that experience of empathy as a uniquely human quality? In other words, how is that creating a larger and larger deficit in your life and then your society as a whole? So you must, in my awareness, go to that higher level thinking and go, wow, have an aha moment that how valuable the trait of empathy is, to how valuable it is to be sensitive to ethics, how important it is for you to be aware of your own boundaries and standards, and actually what living self-esteem is. We are talking really about living, the ability to feel as if you are with the living again. I think for a lot of people, they experience a death of self. Really, truly, almost like a phantom self if they've been in an abusive relationship for some time. You can read the memoirs of those who have been in concentration camps. And really, there's a testimony to one of the psychologists of that time, really a testimony to, survive mentally strong, the toughest of circumstances, such as those that were experienced in concentration camps of Nazi Germany, and people who have been, survivors of this. So there's testimony to the spirit of the strength of the human soul. And to connect to that is to know empathy. So if you right now can connect to a miracle that a human would have had to endure to be set through a concentration camp in Nazi Germany. I mean, you can study that. If you're not of U.S. history, you might hear about this in global history, the absolutely horrific atrocities that were rendered by really a psychopath. So if you can understand the numbness, and then the numbness that has to occur in the target to sort of dissociate in order to survive and flourish mentally, what needs to occur. So that very much is like the experience. So you have to have some very simple ABC building blocks and give yourself the vocabulary of what you have experienced to identify it correctly so that you understand and have working knowledge, living knowledge of what has occurred in your own life. In other words, where your own bare feet have walked. So we're talking about re-owning that path where you were and you had to sort of dim the lights. You're like, whoa, this is getting scary. I have to walk in the dark. Very much like an emotional Helen Keller experience where you had to continue on, but you had to sort of swallow many wounds, many hurt feelings that were not recognized. So that is part of the trauma bond, is to realize that you had to sort of promulgate or promote or uplift the abuser in order to survive, in order to make the delusions or K or whatever their standards were, the enmeshment, not acknowledging and validating who you really are. And then really, people really feel left behind. They feel left behind or unacknowledged and unvalidated by the relationship because of that lack of empathy. So you didn't have that warmth experience. Oftentimes with a narcissist, there is a rejection of that. It's kind of like if the oven ain't on, the bread ain't gonna bake. If you don't have, Vincent Genna, has a great, test. He talks about this as sort of, if you haven't preheated the oven, no matter what, if you can have the greatest pan, all the great ingredients but if the oven isn't on, it's not going to flourish. It's not going to come to life. It's not going to self-actualize. So really is to understand the profound effects of relationships that are with those who have lack of empathy and lack of consciousness, which we see that promulgated in the psychopath population. So, and understand that these aren't always, the cold dragons or Draculas that we, you think that are in the movies. These oftentimes have the pretense or the presence of that which is otherwise. In other words, they want to seem as if they put a false bravado on. They seem as if, and then they each all fool each other, and then just keep that going. But otherwise, but what I'm trying to explain is that, they will need to step on others, throw others on, down as stepping stones to keep themselves up. In other words, to make themselves bigger or taller. This is what they do. They keep a stack of these folks in their wake. So throw them, and then it just elevates them. It's a way for them to elevate themselves in the eyes of others, which is what they have an insatiable need for: power and control. So you must understand these very, very simple puzzle pieces. We don't want to make it, 1,000 pieces. I want to make it very clear, what the narcissist and psychopath relationship is based on, this trauma bond, which is based on fear, predicated fear. So if they can intimidate, if they can bully, if they can make you feel insecure, if you are then confirmed unlovable, that you must then, in order, this is a painful truth. In other words, if you were to realize this would sort of really create like a mental collapse, I would say, at the time. In other words, this is the sort of shutting down is a defense mechanism of yourself to endure the trauma bond. So it's a natural reaction, very much like the mechanisms of a grain of sand in an oyster that creates the pearl, I would say. And so it's enough. It's threatening to its life that you have to sort of secrete a certain, cocooning within and a denial within of what you are going through. So that is how then the self-denial, in other words, becomes a very much repressing of your life. Your life becomes, depressed. Your life becomes, flattened. Your life becomes almost like as an unleavened bread, without the love to give it dimension, without the warmth, without the empathy. So it becomes something which is really oftentimes unpalpable. There is suffering going on. True love is not abusive. It is not mean. It is not threatening. It does not cause this fear. So usually the narcissist and the psychopath will gain control by some degree of fear and pain. So this is how, but it's not to be supportive and growth enhancing. It is to be prohibitive of that. So that is the problem. And then so people then feel, I would say, left behind, that they are behind and that they must catch up to the abuser. They must, validate this love, that they are lovable. So they're seeking an answer for their life from an abuser, someone who has, basically treated them without the presence of love, without empathy, who has been negligent or denying of their needs. So really, in a narcissist, all they see really of others is them is really an extension of their needs. So if you can't keep them on that elevated status with you being down, then they will just sort of take out and project all of their negativity onto you. So it's a way for them to sort of, almost like the inner workings of a clock, keep that cycle going. And this creates a lot of tension. And then people then get addicted or sort of accustomed to this agitation, just like, because it's carved and created this sort of addictive neurochemical experience within the brain itself. So the brain will get addicted to these high stimulating experiences. So that of a trauma bond, it'll try to keep so it's just, I believe, the same addiction mechanism like you might see in those people who are addicted to, say, cocaine. From what I understand is that, the cocaine creates this surge of neurochemicals, which creates a new neurochemical pathway, which sort of lights up the brain and creates almost like a new room, a new corridor, a new offshoot, a new neurochemical experience in the brain, while that chemical is present. And then when it comes down, the neurochemicals want to refill that newly created sort of black hole, if you will, that surge or energy level in the brain. So it then seeks that high level of excitement. And so that user of that substance will want to redo that substance. So I am not addicted to cocaine. That is my understanding of the research and studies of the mechanisms of addiction. So, those people who are coming down from addiction need to be able to weather the craving. Or people who are alcoholics, people who are very much addicted to alcohol. And they are, it's sort of the way I experience alcoholism is those individuals. It's almost like it is a substance that they are addicted, it's a substance that they are, what is the word that I'm looking for? That they are allergic to. It's almost like it has a negative reaction. Has anybody had an allergic reaction to something? Or a negative reaction. So it's kind of like the alcoholic, they're addicted to this sort of, this mechanism, which they are addicted, they lose control. The substance then is abusing them. The drink, like Napoleon Hill says, the drink is drinking them. They're no longer drinking the drink. So that's like really when it becomes very painful and you have an aha moment and go, wow, this has to change. Something about my life, my living, my I am has to change. So the trauma bond, you have to realize that you have to reset and establish for yourself, give yourself the permission and the self-respect, even if you have not experienced this, to protect your boundaries and support. You are not left behind by an abuser. You say no to the abuse, and you realize that you don't need to create that same pattern that might have been an addictive pattern sort of running your life for some time. Meaning that you're trying to quell those rejections. In other words, you keep getting addicted to the rejection and try to settle the score or appease them. It becomes part of the dynamic that you need to break. Stop appeasing or pacifying the abuser. Stop protecting them. Stop feeling guilty for regaining your senses and seeing and knowing. It's difficult to take ownership of this. It is very painful, but yet it is also very energizing when you can own this, because this is your unique and original and true experience. You need to be able to come to your senses. It's like your emotional senses, your etheric body. What gives you energy, what gives you, happiness, and what helps you give you the positive environment and climate enough within to begin the path of pod thinking, positive, orderly direction thinking, feeling, becoming, and you will become then on the ladder sort of to the positive. Your life will expand and fill up in the positive. In other words, you'll be having around and feeling and experiencing what it is that you love and then loves you back. An abuser, no matter how much you want it, they cannot love you back. They can feign love. They can pretend love. They can put on a show as if. But if they are really there for you in your hard times, this is what love is. Love is unconditional. It's not based on your appearing as if, pretending as if. So oftentimes that enmeshment, that violation of boundaries by a narcissist is for them to sort of take you over as their own without allowing you, the empathy of feeling. So those really sort of gets deadened. People might have, they say, I have a deadened soul. I have a deadened life. I am mediocre. I'm not, feeling good. I don't feel like my life is, increasing or being stimulated, or that I'm feeling better or enjoying or seeing things in a refreshing and reinforcing way. It's because you're sort of stuck in the trap of that denial and feeling limited by that. So these are then self-imposed limitations, which then you have to re-erect, which is boundaries, and then your standards, which you can then grow and become and improve in. where the narcissist will not allow that improvement. The psychopath will not allow that improvement. It's a direct conflict. It's a non, it cannot occur. It's like water and oil. You are of a different substance that they cannot engage with and emerge with and share with in your authenticity. So it is a threat. A narcissist is all about them and what they want. Usually there is always an ulterior motive. There is a kitty, there is a pot, there is something that they have to take and derive from the relationship, which is always going to keep this imbalance of they need to be seen as if despite their treatment. So this is the cognitive dissonance that people then also experience in a trauma bond that keeps them feeling left behind. So to emerge from that is to understand and emerge from the denial that you have to agree to be abused and treated this away. Basically, back in the origination of the trauma bond, one was unconscious or unable to consciously decide from a low pressure place, an objective place, I'm agreeing to this treatment. So in other words, they had to over identify and protect the abuser, rescue them. They became those who feel that they wanted to rescue them and then, begin to give them a relationship based on warmth or whatever that you could add or share. There is no sharing. There is no sharing of a certain type of relationship with a narcissist or a psychopath. They do not engage. They have a need to feel better than, it's a different dynamic. And, you don't have to be good for their standards. You have to be good to erect your own standards and give yourself the initial I am, which you have been denied. So not only do you need to emerge from the denial, you need to understand what you have been denied to break down that denial and stop living in that liberated, in that hindered or restricted or constricted or oppressed manner. Because based on that, it'll cause you those decisions to be like, in order to continue for this relationship, you had to live in denial. You had to accept their negation. You have to realize and sort of get back to that and then realize where that had originally occurred. So we're talking about really deep and sort of unbuckling that which had and undoing and releasing that very small or bad decision that had to be made by you, that created and then promulgated maybe a whole pattern of other bad decisions by you in order to keep that trauma bond in place, protect the abuser, and somehow keep you connected to an abuser. So it's kind of like if you have a ball and chain around your ankle, and every time you lift up your foot, that ball scuffs your leg, you get kind of used to making sure that you get scuffed. That's sort of the pain that you get used to, and sort of the adrenaline, that's what your brain gets hooked with. So very much like that cocaine addict that is addicted to those higher states, and even though it's dysfunctional, eventually they get controlled or overpowered by the substance. For those people who are truly addicted, alcoholics who are truly, they are overpowered by alcohol. They, as Napoleon Hill says, the drink is drinking them. They're no longer drinking the drink. So that sort of switch of power where you then basically in those unconscious moments have to agree to being powerless and giving them the power. In other words, this was the way to go. So, and then there's the course and stretch of your journey where then, because based on that decision, you had to then continue a certain pattern or life or way of life or, where your path had you had walked your path basically. And emerging from that, so you probably had moments of reflection, where you had to keep that and then felt, there is something wrong, and you continue to suffer and then see red flags and then live in fear, but continue to suffer. And then it did not become communicated and worked through. These are known as, unresolved issues. So it didn't have a chance to get out and be communicated, be aired out. It becomes packed. And this really, my feeling, is how people then develop that sort of anxiety disorder, this post-traumatic stress disorder, this sort of fear running their life. They, aren't comfortable. They continue to attract then abusive relationships, and they don't know why. It's getting like the emotional Helen Keller and being, having the desire enough and the courage enough, despite the fact that you feel removed from your senses, despite the fact that you feel handicapped, despite the fact that you feel maybe inadequate, unloved, or unfit for life because of this rejection. It might have gone deep into your I am, which is really the soul of your being. So you have to understand where the hurt is, how far deep it goes, and own it and know it. And so you have to be okay with, looking at that stretch. I mean, is the stretch 20 years, 30 years, 50 years? Is it 10 months? Where can we really understand, when this cycle really gets set up? And then from a space of love, look at that and look at that with warmth and empathy and affection for those moments towards self, and re-own it, and then liberate and let go from that, and just give those initial painful moments a place of love and unconditional love and positive self-regard. So allowing yourself to revisit that space of trauma, and just to be loved and to be strong, and just to put presence and light, I would say, in those moments. In other words, light of understanding, light of vision, life of feeling, and life of being able to grow and develop in fullness and fulfillment, in even despite those very caustic moments, those that created the trauma that then creates the triggers, which keeps the patterns, the negative patterns in your life. So it's being able to, little by little, put liberation and freedom in that, and to know that you are protected from the abuser, and you don't have to be marred, hurt, controlled, held back, or inflicting damage during those moments that you have maybe been carrying for some time. In other words, you can cut off that ball and chain that has the little prickers that keep hurting you, and then stop injuring yourself. Stop protecting the abuser. See it for what it is. See them for who they are. Forgive them and let them go. For they know not, or they do know what they do, but they choose not to do better. This is your buddy, Peace and Harmony, with you here today, and I hope that these videos do help. Please share, please subscribe, and for goodness sake, please donate for more great tools, videos, discussion, and support. Peace, life, and really liberty be within you, and be energized in this today, and just find joy in regaining your sense of being. That is what I wish for you, and also for that without, so that you see that reflected in others without, and this experience becomes okay and acceptable to you, and that you can grow in fulfillment in your positive, orderly direction, thinking, feeling, and behaving, and becoming, moving forward. We